Welcome to the Look Good, Move Well podcast.
All right, rock and roll. We're doing it. We're talking more nutrition this week. And what's the first word that comes to mind that sounds like macros to you?
Tacos?
Tacos?
Is that close enough?
Tacos? What kind of macros
What
are
kind of
in
macros
that?
are in my tacos?
Macros? Macaroni?
Oh, yeah, that's good.
I heard you say
Macaroons?
What else? Yep. Matcha?
Matcha?
Ugh.
I'm not a fan.
Green tea. Any matcha fans out there, I apologize.
Yeah, we're sorry.
A matcha latte, people are like, I love a matcha latte. I'm like, you like sugar and milk. Like, you're not,
That's green.
it's green. I could color that with coffee, and then we're talking.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's a macro. We're gonna keep the conversation going from last time. We really nailed what we called protein. The practical protein challenge. No, the 50 gram challenge. Yeah, 50 gram challenge. Get 50 grams of protein before 10 a.m. All about why that was important.
Yeah.
But let's expand the conversation around. Let's move beyond protein as, the only macro that matters, because the other macros can matter.
Sure.
And what are you going to encounter when you first start to track macros?
Oh,
Why?
yeah.
What are you going to run into? And we're inspired to talk about this because our very own Nate, media producer, podcast producer, just awesome human, is exploring, tracking his food in a more objective way than he has in quite some time, maybe ever. And so he's kind of running into some of we're having conversations around like, how do I do this? Or, let's look at the app together. How do we set your macros up? How do we get the best numbers from the calculator? So maybe we could just do that from like not start to finish, because we can't cover everything, that you would teach and learn in a 30-minute episode, but we can kind of hit some of the highlights of, all right, so you're interested in starting to track your food, or you've been inspired to take a more detailed approach. Like the idea that eating clean, I'm just going to eat clean, is now kind of run its course.
Right.
And now you're like, okay, what's the next layer?
Yeah.
Right? Because there's a lot of ways to approach nutrition and dieting. There's sort of categorically, I can just sort of say, I'm gonna only eat these foods. Well, that's one way of just sort of limiting what you can eat and therefore restricting some of the amount of food that you eat. That could be somebody like, I'm going to just go eat clean foods and nothing processed. Okay, that's one approach. I'm going to cut out all processed carbs. Cool. That's another approach. I'm going to cut out all meat. I'm going to go vegan. Cool. That's just another approach. It's another approach to just sort of controlling how much you're eating. And then at some point, there might be an argument to say, okay, well, no matter what you're eating, why don't we actually get more objective and down to the science of how much are you actually eating? Because you can undereat and overeat on any of those categorical restriction diets. You can eat clean and gain weight. You can eat vegan and gain weight.
Yeah.
You can eat vegan and eat clean and lose weight, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of maybe where someone arrives at. And then they're like, okay, what do I do next, right?
Yeah. I was just thinking about when I first started tracking my own food and how mind-blowing that was on so many levels. And it's an activity that I feel it takes a lot to do it. And there's no way of getting around the fact that it's an effort to undertake it. And there are things you can do to make it easier, sure. And we can talk about that some today. But the value of actually doing it has made me come back to it again and again and again, because I never have the results that I've had from when I'm tracking in any other way.
I agree. Yeah. I mean, I tracked, or I actually didn't track. Tracking and planning kind of different things. Tracking is eat what you're eating and track it, and then make some adjustments, and then just you kind of eat and track, and then you maybe try and hit targets and goals. Whereas like my early on experience was create a structured meal plan that fits certain numbers and then follow it like
to a T,
right? So I at least had learned a lot about what goes into food and how much was in food, but I wasn't looking at it from like, well, I want to eat all the foods that I'm interested in, but learn how to mold them into the diet that will work for my goals right now.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas that's kind of more what starting tracking your food is about. It's like if I started with you today, you had just a sort of general goal of like, I want to lose weight, or I want to feel better, I want to understand my nutrition better, then I would not say like, okay, go eat these 10 things. Right. I would say, cool, what are you eating today? Mm-hmm. Let's track that for the next 2 weeks. And there's so much power that and learning and education that comes from that process of, it's a self-awareness process, because when you're eating, you're maybe connected, you may or may not be connected to the feelings that you're having with the food.
Yeah.
But when you start to look at the information that comes with each item that you're eating or each meal, how much energy is in it, what kind of nutrients are in it, you start to wake up to like, oh, like, yeah, I've known protein is important.
Yeah.
But like, I didn't know that I was only getting this much protein.
Exactly.
Or I knew protein was important, and I thought that the protein salad from Blue Barn was like really high in protein, but it's actually not that high in protein. Like, this is what you start to learn by just taking the step to say, I'm gonna take actual stock of what's going in, and in a more detailed scripted way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'd love to get into the really practical things around tracking and the obstacles that people normally encounter with it, because I think that and as a company, I think that we have been in this camp as well of just, okay, yeah, you got to track, and like, here's what you are going after for your targets, and here's generally what to do. But then there's a whole other layer of like, what actually happens between you and your food and your app and your kitchen.
Right.
That's like a whole other learning experience to that.
Correct. Yeah. And I kind of like, I can make the example or use the analogy of training, right? Where when we talk about getting somebody started, what's the most important thing? Just getting them to do it and be consistent doing it. If you were doing a functional bodybuilding workout today, you came into the gym and you had been with us for 3 years and you were doing the reps and you weren't hitting your tempos and you weren't following the rest periods, I might pull you aside and be like, hey, let's work on this tempo thing. Like, this is a very fundamental part of the weight training that we do. Like, but if it was your second day and you're like doing the reps and you're not doing the tempo perfectly and you're just still trying to figure out like how to manage these supersets, I would just be focused on like, hey, you having fun? Like, you getting great movement. Hey, let me correct your form in this one way. Awesome. Hell yeah. You look like you're having a good time, like getting the work done. You're sweating, like good for you.
Yeah.
Because that's all that matters.
Yeah.
And the same is true for tracking, right? Tracking food, there's like people who do it well and there's people who do it poorly. Like and I'm actually going to say like, it's like, that's not right, but you're doing it. Mm-hmm. That is really accurate, but you didn't do it for more than one day in a row, right? Like, what's better? It's like the person that's just doing it. And I think when people get started tracking their food, it's about just doing it.
Yeah.
It's about taking whatever information and putting it in your phone that you can, or putting it in your tracking app. Like when I asked Nate, he's like, I got started on MyFitnessPal, and I was like, oh, pull it open. Let me see what you're doing. And I'm like, okay, I can spot 10 things that he could do better. But I'm like, you know what? Let's not overwhelm Nate. Like, hey, what I want you to do is I want you to switch this setting to macro focused, which I don't want to get, we don't have to get too detailed on it, but basically his app, when he opened it at the top, was focused on calories, how many calories he needed to get each day. And it was trying to factor, it's like, you have this many calories left. You have this many calories left. You have this much, you moved this much. And I was like, you know what? Let's get away from that. Let's switch it over to macro focused. And so instead he sees, this is how many macros I have left. This is how many grams of protein I've hit and how many I still have to go.
Yep.
And now he's like, now his eyes is focused on this number of protein, whereas in the previous view, he didn't even see that.
Yeah.
He was just kind of guessing.
Right.
And so that's like one little tip to like improve, like become a better exerciser. Well, become a better tracker, and the act of learning how to track these little nuggets, make it more efficient, make it feel like less of an obstacle in your life, provide you with more information, and ultimately more flexibility in what you can do for your diet while still reaching your goals and not sabotaging yourself by making like daily mistakes without knowing it.
Yeah, totally. Well, I would love to like just throw out a couple obstacles that I've encountered, as I was learning macro tracking, and then you can throw in some that have come from your conversations with Nate or from what you've seen with clients or experienced yourself, and then maybe we could like pick a couple to kind of go into in more detail.
Yes.
Does that sound good? So one for me is like, the difference between tracking the things that you've sort of like in your mind designated as things you're going to track versus like the little things that happen in your day. Like I'm going to grab a couple bites of my kid's food, or I'm just going to pop a couple of these in my mouth, and like that whole layer. Another one is like, what the heck do I do if I go out to eat? That's a real like black box, for me in my macro tracker.
Totally.
Yeah. What else?
Let's just start with those. Let's just chip away at them. The act of tracking is to say, or the commitment to tracking is, at the very minimum, it's you track everything that goes into your body. If you're not willing to do that, if you're not prepared to do that, then this is not going to be a very effective tool for you to create any meaningful change or to create a reliable, like, you're trying to build an a trail of evidence.
Yeah.
That will change your belief system.
Yep.
I've been writing about this stuff and listening to a lot of it. It's like, we don't choose what we believe. Our belief systems are built on the evidence of our past. You are the way you are, the shape you are, the fitness level you are, the body weight you are, because of this is what you've done in the past, this is who you are, and you don't get to believe that you can be somebody else until you prove it repeatedly through evidence and evidence and evidence to the contrary. And then a perfect example is like, I can't eat carbs. Like I just put on weight every time I eat carbs. And it's like, I could tell you that the evidence out there and the studies and the this and the that, like that is false. And you're like, sorry, I can't change that belief. It's ingrained in me because of these experiences that I had back here. So then the tool is, track everything that goes into your body. Eat carbohydrates. Control for, you start to now track this and you see, okay, well, when I ate to my calorie goal, but I ate a lot of carbs, but I still kept my calories in check and my protein in check. Look at that. I can eat a lot of carbs and lose weight and get lean. Mm-hmm. And I'm talking about my own experience. Like I've changed my belief system around food through tracking. That means eating gluten. That means eating carbs. That means like eating seed oils and, ramping up my saturated fat intake and then dropping it down. Like this is how I have learned to overcome beliefs that have been. So if you're not ready to do I'm going to track everything, then just know that there's a big limitation on what this tool can do for you.
Yeah.
The second thing you said was?
Going out to eat.
Going out to eat. Beautiful. Going out to eat is part of life. When you commit to signing up to track food, it does not mean you have to stop being a person. Okay? Going out to eat is more and more and more, there are more and more options available for you to help you track. When I go out to eat, I always track. But I know that it's not perfect.
Yeah.
I can't control the thing. I can't control what's on the plate. I don't know exactly how they prepared it. There are some places out there that are easier to do it at than others.
Mm-hmm.
Domino's Pizza turns out to be one of the best places to go for pizza if you're an app tracker person.
Nice.
They have a very detailed menu, website, PDF that has breakdown by breakdown of like building a custom pizza from like you choose light sauce, you choose medium sauce, you choose heavy sauce, you choose light cheese, like, and all the crusts, and like you can basically get fairly accurate. And the people making the pizzas there are robotic because that's how thin their margins are. When it says light cheese, they put on 3 ounces of cheese. You know, they do it the same way.
Right.
Anyway, that's
Chipotle
if you want
too.
Chipotle, right? However, you don't need to go to Domino's. Like you can eat at any pizzeria.
Yeah.
What you do is you make your best attempt at tracking that food by going into your app and selecting the thing that's on there that is most closely correlated to what you're eating.
Mm-hmm.
You got a medium or a small personal pizza with cheese, with pepperoni, and with, olives. Okay, type that in. Something's going to pop out. Add that to your, tracker. You had a beer. Enter that in. Cool. Like, you got a salad, a side of potatoes. Add that in. Is it going to be perfect? No. Now, eating out and tracking when you're eating out, it might start to influence your choices when you're eating out. You're like, oh, I got to track this.
I got to track that, so I got to stay honest.
So maybe that's a good thing.
Yeah.
The real benefit I see to doing this is that now you've engaged in this process of tracking because you you have some desired outcome. You ate out 5 times in week 1 and 5 times out in week 2. And you get to the end of week 2 and you're like, man, this is like, I'm starting to feel some of the benefits and see I'm like, wow, these meals that I'm eating out are really throwing a lot of things off here. Like they're making me overeat, or like it's hard to, eating out so often is an obstacle to my goal. I really want my goal. Hey, you know what? I'm going to eat out a little less, right? Or I'm going to go from 5 to only eating out 3 times. Or when I eat out, I'm going to be a little bit more precise about where I eat out and what I choose to eat out.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm going to make one of these a trip to Chipotle where I know that they have a macro-friendly, meal. And so by choosing to track the meals out, and it brings more awareness to how that's impacting your goal, then guess what? Tracking is now going to potentially lead to you making different choices when you're out that are going to be more supportive of your goal. So don't start tracking unless you're committed to tracking everything that goes in, from little bites of food. Like if you eat it, this is another thing. It's like, I'm going to have a couple bites of my kids' food. I got to track that. Oh, that's annoying. I'll just
maybe I just won't do that.
I won't have the bites, right? Or
maybe I won't weigh these 2 Sour Patch Kids I'm about to eat.
Precisely, right?
Right.
I've done a lot of. I've become a pro at weighing and measuring the scraps of foods that my kids leave out on the counter, and I'm like, okay, I'm having about 0.28 servings of the protein pancake right now,
right.
And I'm having 127 grams of the peach that that was half eaten on the table, and yeah, I'm that guy.
Totally. Okay, how about this one? You've got your macros and you go and track them all and follow the plan, and then it's oh, maybe I need to change these macros, I think that there's a lot of analysis paralysis about being on the right numbers.
Yeah. Well, I think that's really one of the reasons why we've, worked on making some updates to our macro calculator is because I think what's really, when we think about it, it's I'm really geeky about macros and about trying different macro ratios, and I've done a lot of different experimenting, thankfully, because I built this case and this solid string of evidence to show like actually it doesn't really matter. Like
it was a lot of work to understand it doesn't really
to
matter.
To understand,
but you have a lot of evidence for that.
If you hit your, what I have learned is that like I placed a higher, I've always placed a high importance on protein, actually to a fault. Like I've overeaten protein for a long time. I'm like, oh, I actually don't need that much protein to still maintain and build strength and be muscular. Like, okay, well that's good. I'd eat a little less protein, and then that makes me have more room for carbs and fats, whatever. I've also learned that like, oh yeah, I do well with higher carbs, or I can do well with higher carbs, and I like higher carbs. I don't need to be afraid of higher carbs, and I don't get, chubby overnight because I had, a bowl of cereal. But what is more important for people getting started is that start in the middle. Yeah. Macros are just another way of tracking your like calories. Like it's, what are you doing? I count macros. It's like, well, then you track kind of your energy intake as dispersed amongst 3 categories, right? Of those categories, protein is the one that probably is the only one that's making the biggest difference in your physique. The calories themselves are what's making the biggest difference in your weight. And then the carbs and the fats are just sort of there. So when someone's like, are these the right macros for me? The question becomes, am I trying to fit a box based upon macros that doesn't feel right to me because it's not practical in my life? So let me say that another way. If you're eating a macro, like there's macros that you're eating, and you're like, man, I'm always arriving at the end of the day with like 100 grams over my carbs, 30 grams under my fat, and I'm always right on with protein. Then they're like, this person feels like they're failing, right? They're like, I'm 100 over here, I'm 30 under here, but I'm hitting this. Like, I'm not hitting my macros. I'm like, well, all things being equal, like your calories are the same, and you're hitting your protein, so you're doing good. Like, yeah, maybe you should just up your carbs and lower your fat, and then you'll be like, oh, I'm nailing my macros.
Then your apple look prettier.
Yeah. Right. So like for every gram of fat that you undereat, you get to eat 2 more grams of carbs. Yeah. So it's like you're over by, 60 on your carbs, but you're under by 30 on your fat. Like that's a wash. It's a total wash. Yep. And you're like, I didn't get my macros right. It's like, no, you're good, because you hit your protein and you're totally fine. Yeah. So there might be a case for like and then let's say that person is like, they're really trying to like squeeze themselves to like fit that other profile. And so they're like skipping fruit for breakfast when they really like fruit for breakfast. And they're adding a pat of butter to their dinner plate when that's not really appetizing to them, but they're like, I got to hit my fat macros. And it's like, okay, you're now trying to reshape and reconstruct what feels like the right balance of food on a plate for yourself to sort of arbitrarily hit carb and fat numbers, when really it's like, you could be high carb because you like carbs, and then Nate's low carb because he likes more fattier stuff, and you both are hitting the same calories, and you're both winning, and you're both doing the right thing because you're getting enough protein. So that's where it could make sense to change macros. The other place is like someone's like, I'm not seeing results. Yeah. Then we go back to, did you track every single thing that went into your body? Yep. And then how accurately did you track those things? Well, I ate out 10 times this week, and I also ate out of like a packaged thing most of my meals. So I was scanning a barcode. Barcodes and nutrition labels have 20% wiggle room from the FDA. So like you could be 20% off by scanning the barcode because it's, they didn't accurately report their calories. Yep. And you ate out so many times that you didn't realize that the salad that you were having, at the place, at the restaurant that looked super healthy, and that you picked the salad option in MyFitnessPal. Well, the salad option at the restaurant actually had like 8 tablespoons of dressing on it. And that was like 500 calories. It's like, so you're not getting results. Were you tracking everything that was going in? Yes or no? How accurate was what you were tracking? Not that accurate, like, so you weren't tracking everything and it was not that accurate what you were actually tracking, and you're not seeing results. Should you change your macros? It's like, no, you shouldn't change them. You should just get more accurate and track things better. And then see if that's actually, if the problem is that you're overeating based upon your calculations. It's like, no, you're overeating because you're making the wrong choices and you're actually not hitting your numbers that we set out to hit in the first place.
Yeah.
Now, if you're like super accurate and very diligent and you followed macros for 2-3 weeks and you haven't seen any change, then yes, you need to change your macros. You need to, whatever, lower or raise them depending on what your goal is. So it's like, I'm trying to think of an analogy, but it's like, if you're doing it correctly and there's no results, you need to change.
Yeah.
If you're doing it incorrectly and there's no results, then focus on just doing it correctly first.
Yeah. Make sure you have good data to work from before you decide.
Great.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I have 2 more for you. You can hit them fast or slow.
Yep.
One is the movement calorie thing in MyFitnessPal and some other macro tracking apps, which I think can like totally throw you off sometimes.
Yeah.
And the other is like, you're in front of your scale, what do you know that other people don't know about like how to actually like grams or ounces, or like how do I
Sure.
like, raw versus cooked, or all of that stuff.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, the say the first one again.
The movement thing.
Yeah. Movement thing. Excuse me. So if it's common with so many devices and wearables that we have that are spitting data to us about how much we're burning, and then your tracking app can API integrate all of that information in there. And it's like, I got my MyFitnessPal is connected to my Whoop, is connected to my Garmin, is connected to my Strava account, it's connected to this, the erg in my gym, and it's like piping in all this information, and now it's telling me like, you just burned 1,000 calories. Go eat 1,000 calories.
Yeah.
Right? Add that to your. This is what. That's not a good approach whatsoever. There's no fitness app or trackable or wearable or device that will accurately report your calories to you, and you can be certain of this if you go buy 3 of them and put them all in your body and then look at them at the end of the day. They'll all say different information, and you're like, oh, which one do I trust? Well, if I trust this one, I can eat more.
Right.
That's
that one looks good.
I'm going with this one, right? So that's not a good approach.
Yeah.
Instead, macros, when we go to our macro calculator on the Functional Bodybuilding website, when you input your information there, it's going to spit out a number as your target, your daily target, based upon all the information that you've given to us, which includes your resting metabolic rate, your activity level, and to a certain degree, your training level. So like, we're already factoring in that this is how much you move on average. Not day to day, but like on average, your body, based upon what you've told us, is going to burn about this much energy. Mm-hmm. It's going to fluctuate from day to day. You're going to have a day where you're highly active. You're going to have a day where you're more sedentary. But on average, based on what you said, you train 3 to 4 times a week. You get about 6,000 to 8,000 steps a day. Okay, boom, you're in the low or the moderate activity category. Now you have a number. That number does not change dramatically for people because they're in consistent rhythms in life.
Yeah.
You have to make a considerable effort to jump from one category to the next. You
Totally.
have to say, I'm going to walk an extra 5,000 steps a day. I'm going to go into the gym 2 more days this week. Mm-hmm. I'm going to stand at my desk for 8 hours a day as opposed to sit for 8 hours a day. Like these,
I'm going to get a job as a UPS delivery driver.
right? Like a big change is
Yeah.
going to have to happen. Or I decided I'm going to start commuting to work on my bike 3 days a week.
Right.
This would bump you from the low activity to the moderate, or the
Yeah.
moderate to the high. Then you can start thinking about adding that many more calories to every day, not to today because you went on a big hike. So the focus has to be on establish what is your best guess at your daily average calorie burn. You can either do that. There's a few ways to figure that out. There's macro calculators. There's total daily energy expenditure calculators out there. The other way to do it that is part of the tracking process is if you track your food for 2 weeks very closely and you get an average daily calorie consumption based upon those 2 weeks, and then your weight, your body weight, if your body weight has remained exactly the same for 2 weeks, guess what? You just discovered through tracking and data what your daily burn is.
Yeah.
So that has to be the number that you're trying to hit. Or some percentage of that is what you're trying to hit. Like, let's say that's your daily burn and you want to lose fat. So like lower it to 15% deficit and then ride that out for a month. Don't miss it a day, right? Don't be like, oh, I didn't do my exercise today, so I'm gonna try and starve myself. It's like, no, stick to that average.
Yep.
The second question was standing in front of the scale. What do I do? How do I weigh certain things? So at some point in the tracking process, you are going to be confronted with like choice. Like, okay, I had a cup of strawberries, or I had a cup of yogurt, or I scooped out a half a cup of oatmeal, or I had like one apple. Mm-hmm. You know, okay, well, I'm looking on the thing. It's like, well, this apple's 110 calories. This one's 70 calories. This one's, you know.
Was that medium, big?
This was a pretty big apple, you know, like what's the right thing?
Yeah.
So you're going to then get to this point where you're like, I think I want to be more accurate. What is the most accurate way to do this? Well, the most accurate way to do it is to weigh the food on a scale and to weigh it in, imperial versus like, why am I blanking on? Metric, excuse me. It's like, how am I going to weigh this? What unit am I going to use? My preference is to always go with grams because you can get a bit more precise than ounces. So people are like, oh, I had 5 ounces of steak. It's like, well, an ounce is 28 grams. And so if you had 5 ounces of steak, what are that? You know, that's around 150 grams. Well, I had 137 grams of steak. That's a bit more precise than measuring in ounces. So that's one trick is like, I never scoop out oatmeal and I'm like, oh, I had a half a cup. Volume metrics are not very accurate. A cup of strawberries, not that accurate. Like, if you want to be accurate, if that's something that matters to you, I would encourage people to do the thing that is most convenient and requires the least energy that produces results for them. If they can consistently do like I had a handful of strawberries, and by doing this process of like tracking in this way and following they're seeing results, and it's like, don't ever bust out a scale. Mm-hmm. But if you arrive at this point where you're like, I want to use a scale because it's more accurate, or if you're the type of person who's like, I want to do this thing the right way.
Yeah. I
don't want to mess around. Like that's how I'm driven. Like, then pull out the scale, measure grams. A half a cup of oatmeal, 45 grams. That's always going to be the same, right? If you take a half a cup scoop of oatmeal and you put it on there, it might actually say 60 grams because you like have a big mound of oatmeal on the top, right? It's
Yep.
the classic thing like, oh, I had my tablespoon of almond butter or peanut butter.
Right.
And someone like pulls the tablespoon out of the jar and it's just like,
mound.
It's like dripping down the sides. It's this mound of, it's like, yeah, that's like 4 tablespoons right there. And that's
just because it's on one spoon.
Yeah. And it's an extra, okay, well, who cares? It's like, because it's an extra 270 calories.
Yeah.
That's just, boom. And if you eat 2,000 calories a day, that's 15% of your calories just right there on a spoon because we're just eyeballing it with a thing. So the other thing is like, if you're weighing something that's like a kind of like peanut butter or whatever, it's like, always put the actual food that you're weighing on the scale and scoop out of it and go. So you take the jar of peanut butter, you put it on the scale, you zero the scale out, and then you scoop it out and it says minus 27 grams, like that's how you do it. You don't scoop it and then try and like
I've been doing this wrong.
Yes. Same with yogurt, same with anything. It's like whatever you're going to measure, if it's a scoopable thing, like put that on there and then scoop it out and use the negative weight.
I knew I was going to get something valuable out of this episode.
And then additionally, there's one other thing that's important enough to mention, which is this idea of cooked versus raw weight food.
Yeah.
Now, if you're trying to track, if you're doing more preparation of your own food, this is great. And how do I track something that, what's the best way to track it? Well, anybody knows this. And I have this experience too. It's like, pick up a baked potato or pick up a raw potato. Okay. I cook French fries for my girls all the time in the air fryer, and they like them really crispy. So I pick up a potato, and it's a 400-gram potato, which is about it's like big enough to be in your hand. It's like a hefty potato, okay?
Okay.
If I chop that up into individual slices, little fries, little frites, throw it in the air fryer, give it like a 2-second spray of avocado oil, and I cook it for 30 minutes in the air fryer, they come out crispy, golden, awesome French fries. If I pull those French fries out and I put them on the scale, it will weigh about 125 to 150 grams. So that means 250 grams of water evaporated out of those potatoes.
Yep.
Okay? But all of the calories of that potato are still right there. So if I go into my fitness pal, I said I had 125 grams of potatoes, but the potato that I put into my into my tracker is a raw potato. It's going to think, oh, you just had you got a little tiny potato.
Right.
No, I had a big old meaty hand-sized potato that I cooked, and all this water evaporated out of it. Now, if I had only air fried them for 5 to 10 minutes, they wouldn't have been as crispy and delicious, and they would have come out and weighed 300 grams.
Yep.
If I did it for 15 minutes, they would have weighed 200 grams. So the amount that you cook something is going to affect the weight of it at the end. And not everyone cooks the same thing or the same stuff in the same way every single time. If I sous vide a chicken breast versus put it on the grill and make it really charred and crispy versus do it in the Instapot and shred it.
Yep.
They kind of weigh different at the end.
Totally.
Now, I'm not trying to get all super, nuancy and freak you out about whether you're measuring it right. It's just measuring the raw weight of food is your best, most accurate way to do it.
Yeah.
So if you can, measure the raw weight. Here's a potato, clunk, 400 grams, go cook it and eat it, right?
Yeah.
Here's a chicken breast. When I pull it out of the pack, it's a 10-ounce chicken breast. That's what I put in my thing, chop it up, cook it in the pan, add some broccoli, add some peppers, pour a little sauce on it, eat my food. Awesome. And so there are other techniques and tracking tips for people who are like, well, what if I want to cook 10 chicken breasts all at once and just have it in my fridge? There's a way to kind of approach that where it's like, okay, we can create something like a recipe inside of your tracking app where you put in all of the ingredients. I was talking about this with Nate this morning. He's like, hey, I did a shredded chicken last night. And I was like, hey, this is a cool feature. He said, I put 8 pounds of chicken in the Instapot. And then I was like, well, what else did you put in? He's like, I put in 1 or 2 canisters of low or no sugar added barbecue sauce. I'm like, great. And then he's like, and some spices. Okay, perfect. So your ingredients were 8 pounds. Your calorically dense ingredients were 8 pounds of chicken and 2 cans of this sauce. So that's your recipe. Those are your total calories. You put them into the recipe feature of MyFitnessPal. When you're done cooking, you put it into plastic Tupperwares and you weigh how much food there was at the end. There was, he started with 8 pounds plus the sauces. It cooked. Some of the stuff came off. He ended up with 7 total pounds of stuff. Great. Now that's your serving. 7 pounds into your app. 8 pounds plus, the ingredients to start with. Now when you go scoop it out, you just type in exactly how much weight of the end product that you are eating, and MyFitnessPal will populate all of the macros for that exact thing because you put it into a recipe.
Yep.
So I couldn't get into the specifics exactly how you do that step by step, but the point here is, as you start to track, remember we started with just get going. Tracking something is better than tracking nothing. Then, okay, commit to tracking everything that goes in. Commit to tracking even when you eat out. Allow that to help inform your decisions about your behaviors and how you want to do things that are going to support your goals. You're starting to become more focused on what's the inputs. Mm-hmm. You're not seeing the results. Okay, let's get better at tracking more accurately, because that's how you're going to really be able to know whether you need to change your goals, your macros, your numbers, is by tracking more accurately. What's a way to track more accurately? Let's start using weight versus volume measurements. Let's stop relying on packaged stuff where you can get a lot of deviations, 20% deviations. Instead, let's focus on whole food ingredients.
Yep.
And let's always measure things when they're in their raw form versus their cooked form. And then, okay, now if you've accomplished all of that, I promise you're seeing results, or you at least have the evidence to prove that you need to make a change.
Yeah.
Then we're at the upper tier where you're like, well, I want to start batch cooking and doing this meal prep thing. How do I do that? It's like, there's a solve for that. It's called building your own recipes, where now I can take my stew out of the fridge that has 10 ingredients in it, 5 different types of meats, 2 different types of vegetables, and 2 sauces. And I know that it's all inputted in there, and I just scoop out 150 grams. Boom. It does the work for me. Right. And you can get there, but that's not the first thing you worry about.
That's not what you do on day one.
It's not what you do on day one. So hopefully that provided a lot of hey, start, you're getting more advanced. You want to make sure you're on the right track. You want to make changes to improve your outcomes. These are all things you can do.
Awesome. I would love to hear people's questions. What are your stumbling blocks with tracking macros or tracking calories or using these apps or anything else?
Yeah. And what's the obstacle to even starting if you haven't yet?
Yeah.
Thanks for your listening. Thanks for your time. We would appreciate those questions from you. You can DM us at Marcus Philly, at Satya Khan. Those handles should be in the show notes. You can go over to Instagram. We love to engage with you. We'll see you next time.
See ya.